She paid just $300 for a rusted-out Cold War relic, sitting half-buried on a forgotten lot. Marley Reyes thought she was buying scrap, maybe something to turn into a shop display or salvage for steel. But when she pulled back the dented side panel, what she found wasn't rust, it was titanium. And not just scraps, armor-grade plating worth millions, hidden in plain sight. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories like this light that spark in you, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is even wilder than this one. Let's get into it. The listing was barely legible. A grainy photo, no description beyond old tank, bring trailer, and a starting bid of $250. Marley Reyes wasn't even looking for anything like it. She'd been browsing auction sites for used welders, maybe a new engine hoist if she could score a deal. But something about that tank squat, rusted and half-buried in overgrowth, made her pause. Maybe it was the absurdity of it, or maybe it was just the kind of chaos her life needed after the years she'd had. Either way, she clicked place bid at $300 and forgot about it until the confirmation email came 2 days later. Congratulations, you've won. When she pulled up to the lot in her beat-up F-350, dragging a borrowed flatbed trailer behind her, the guy waiting didn't even ask for ID. He just waved her toward a fenced area behind the property, where the tank sat like a dying beast, sun-bleached and dented, its treads half sunk into the dirt. Been sitting here since the 90 seconds, he said, wiping sweat from his neck with a rag. Scrap guys don't want to touch it. Too heavy, too much paperwork. You sure you want it? Marley didn't answer right away. She walked a slow circle around the machine, trailing her gloved fingers along the side. The paint was almost gone, just flakes of forest green clinging to raw, rusted steel. Bullet dings pocked the side like acne scars. It looked like it hadn't moved in decades. But it wasn't the kind of rust she was used to, not in all places. There were areas, oddly smooth and dull silver, where the corrosion hadn't eaten through. That struck her as strange, but not strange enough to stop. She signed the handwritten bill of sale, paid cash, and spent the next 5 hours with a winch, a jack, and every curse word she knew trying to load the beast onto the trailer. As she tightened the final strap, sunburned and aching, she caught her reflection in the side mirror grease on her cheeks, hair tied back in a messy bandana, eyes alive in a way they hadn't been in months. For the first time since her dad's old garage had shut down, she felt like she was doing something that might matter. Not for money, not for show, just for the thrill of rebuilding something forgotten. The drive home took 3 hours. People stared on the highway. Some honked. One guy filmed her from his window. She didn't care. When she finally rolled into her gravel lot just before dusk, she backed the trailer beside the barn she used as a workshop and killed the engine. The silence settled in, broken only by cicadas and the faint ticking of cooling metal. She climbed down, stood beside the tank, and exhaled slowly. The thing looked like it could fall apart if she sneezed too hard, but it was hers. All 45 tons of mystery and regret. Marley placed her palm flat on the side. It was warm from the Sunday solid, heavy, and in that moment, she had no idea what kind of treasure or trouble she'd just brought home. The next morning, Marley stood barefoot in the gravel, a mug of black coffee in her hand, staring at the hulking shape just beyond the barn. The rising sun had thrown long shadows across its battered surface, and for a moment it looked more like a sculpture than a war machine, a frozen memory cast in steel and silence. But the closer she got, the less poetic it became. The tank was a mess. Not just rusted, warped, dented, and full of jagged seams where time had torn through bolts and plating. The turret had locked itself into a permanent slump, like a neck too tired to lift its own head. Marley circled it again, slower this time. Her boots crunched over broken glass and clumps of dead leaves. One of the treads was fused to the wheels with sap and mud. Weeds had grown up through the suspension like veins. She pulled open a side hatch and immediately recoiled. The smell hit first, then the dust, thick as ash, swirling in the beam of her flashlight. Inside, The driver's compartment was a collapsed skeleton of wires, torn canvas, and empty bracket mounts. A rat's nest, long abandoned, sat under the seat like some kind of warning. She spent the rest of the morning hauling out debris, shredded insulation, brittle rubber gaskets, rusted bolts that turned to powder in her hands. Every few minutes, she stopped to take a photo, not for documentation, but because she needed to remind herself later why she thought this was a good idea. Her friends had already started messaging. A few had seen the video of her towing the thing through town. One sent a laughing emoji. Another just wrote, "Why?" She didn't reply. At noon, Marley dragged her shop fan outside and sat in its breeze, grease up to her elbows, tank looming behind her like a sleeping dinosaur. She sipped lukewarm water from a plastic bottle and stared up at the clouds. What had she really bought? 1,000 problems and no easy answers. The thing couldn't be restored, not fully. It would take hundreds of hours just to strip it down. And even then, what was the goal? She wasn't a museum. She wasn't military. She didn't even have a use for it, unless it was as an oversized garden sculpture. But still, something about it called to her. Maybe it was the mystery. Maybe it was the fact no one else wanted it. Maybe it was the small, defiant voice in the back of her head that had been screaming for months. Build something. Anything. Just don't quit. Later that evening, as the sun began to slip below the tree line, Marley ran a magnet across one of the side panels, just to see what would stick. The odd thing was, it didn't. The magnet slid off like the panel was non-ferrous. Confused, she tried again. Same result. She frowned and tapped the metal with a wrench. The sound wasn't hollow, but it wasn't the usual thud of corroded steel either. It rang. She crouched down, flashlight in hand, and rubbed at a clean patch with a rag. Beneath the grime and oxidation, the surface wasn't rust red. It was silver, dull, matte, and strange. Her pulse quickened, steel rusted, aluminum corroded. But this didn't seem to do either. The next morning, Marley returned with a grinder and a fresh flap disc, still uncertain about what she'd seen the night before. Part of her thought maybe she'd imagined it the color, the tone, the strange resistance to rust. But curiosity has a way of eating at mechanics, especially the kind who've rebuilt more junk than joy. She pulled on her gloves, clamped her goggles over her eyes, and squeezed the trigger. Sparks flared instantly, lighting up the side of the tank in bursts of gold. The grinding wheel sliced through the top layer of flaked paint and oxidized gunk. But what was underneath stopped her cold. It wasn't steel, not the kind she'd ever seen. The grinder revealed a wide patch of metal, pale and slick, like brushed aluminum but heavier, denser. It caught the sunlight without gleaming, more like absorbing it than reflecting. She reached out and ran her fingers over the exposed section. It was warm, smooth, and untouched by the usual pits and grooves time left behind. No corrosion, no scaling, just a single, flawless plate. Her breath caught. She tried again with the magnet. Nothing. The magnet slid off like ice on glass. Marley stood back, heart hammering a little faster now. Something was off. Way off. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture, then sent it to her friend Jace, a machinist she used to work with before the garage shut down. "You ever seen this before?" she wrote, attaching the photo. He responded 2 minutes later. "That's not normal. Is that your tank project?" "Yeah. Grind deeper. Take a chip and bring it in." "You think it's titanium?" "Looks like it. But if it is, you're sitting on a fortune." Marley just stared at the message. Titanium? On a tank? For what? The stuff was expensive. Crazy expensive. She knew military gear sometimes, used at aircraft, experimental vehicles, but not some rusted-out relic sitting in a field outside of town. And if it was titanium, how much of it? That night, she stayed in the barn long after the crickets started up. She worked by shoplight, carefully grinding away patch after patch, peeling back decades of dirt and deception. The more she uncovered, the more surreal it became. The entire side panel, from track to turret, was plated in the same strange metal, seamless, solid, and beneath one of the panels, bolted under a rusted steel overlay, was an inspection stamp barely visible under the grime. T6, Al, 4 volts. Her stomach flipped. Aerospace-grade titanium alloy. Exactly what Jace had suspected. Marley lowered the grinder and just stared at the tank, now shining like something from another time. This wasn't just an old war machine. This was something else. Something secret. She reached out again and placed her hand against the plating. It was still warm. It almost felt like it was alive. And in that quiet moment, deep in the Georgia dusk, she realized this wasn't just a project. This was a discovery. By sunrise, Marley had already peeled off most of the right side armor, each panel heavier than the last. Her forearms ached from torquing bolts that hadn't moved in decades. Some she had to cut. Others she soaked in PB Blaster overnight and coaxed gently, whispering curses like prayers. She'd laid out the removed plates across a row of sawhorses, wiping them down with old towels just to confirm it wasn't a fluke. But it wasn't. Every single slab had that same pale, dull glow. Titanium. Real. Heavy. And wildly out of place. The further she got into the teardown, the stranger things became. Underneath the outer hull, which had clearly been tacked on as camouflage, the tank didn't match any diagram she'd seen. It had the bones of a standard Cold War-era chassis, but the interior frame had been reinforced, not with steel beams, but with intricate latticework of cross-ribbed metal bolted in like an exoskeleton. She tapped on one of the internal braces and got that same sharp singing ring. Titanium there, too. None of this made sense. Standard tanks were made to be durable, but cost-effective. Titanium was 5 times the price of steel, and a nightmare to work with, too brittle at certain temperatures, too hard for field repairs. No military force would armor a mass production tank this way. Which meant this wasn't one. This had been something else entirely. A prototype? An experiment? She needed answers. By midday, Marley had filled a 5-gallon bucket with rusted bolts and broken fasteners. Her gloves were torn at the knuckles, and a long streak of dried blood ran down her wrist where a sharp edge had bit back. But she didn't stop. Something about the tank, the way it held together, the way it resisted being understood, made her stubborn. She wanted to know its story. Inside the turret chamber, she found a metal junction box welded to the wall. Most of the wires were gone, chewed or frayed to nothing, but the box itself had a strange insignia on it. Not a military marking, but a private manufacturer's logo she didn't recognize. A simple triangle inside a circle. She snapped a photo. Another mystery. By late afternoon, she had cleared enough of the lower hull to find the access hatch underneath. It was jammed shut with corrosion, so she grabbed her torch. The hiss of propane echoed through the barn as she cut through the bolts. The hatch finally dropped open with a clang, revealing a narrow crawl space beneath the floor pan. At first glance, it looked empty, just dust and old insulation, but something metallic caught the light in the corner. She reached in and pulled out a flat, sealed case military green, scratched, but intact. No markings, no lock, just heavy-duty latches and a satisfying click as she opened it. Inside were 6 laminated sheets, schematics, detailed drawings, layered blueprints of the exact tank she now owned, but with annotations she couldn't quite decipher. Parts that didn't match any standard build. Notes written in tight, slanted handwriting. Something about composite plating sequences and hull fatigue points. And stamped at the bottom of every page, classified, eyes only, Project Valkyrie. Marley blinked. Her fingers hovered over the blueprints, not knowing whether to feel thrilled or terrified. This wasn't just rare metal. This was history someone had tried very hard to bury. The next day, Marley wrapped one of the smaller titanium plates in an old towel, stuffed it in her duffel bag, and drove out to see Jace. His machine shop sat on the edge of town, tucked behind a row of shuttered warehouses. The outside looked abandoned, peeling paint. A rusted sign that once read Holloway Precision, but inside, the hum of lathes and milling machines was alive and sharp. Jace was already elbow-deep in a hydraulic press when she walked in. He wiped his hands on his coveralls and raised an eyebrow. "That the mystery metal?" She nodded and laid it on the workbench. He picked it up, grunted from the weight, then frowned. "That's solid," he muttered. "Too heavy for aluminum, too clean for stainless." He set it under a microscope, then grabbed his hardness file set. Marley stood in silence as he tested the edge, listened for the telltale resistance. Then he switched tools, pulled out a handheld XRF analyzer, a chunky device that looked like a futuristic radar gun, and pressed it to the metal surface. The screen beeped, then displayed a list of elements. Titanium, 90%. Aluminum, 6%. Vanadium, 4%. Jace turned slowly toward her, blinking like he didn't trust what he'd just read. "Marley," he said quietly. "This is T6 Al, 4 volts. She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "That good?" He set the analyzer down like it might explode. "This isn't good. This is aerospace-grade titanium. Military spec. The kind they use in jet engines and ballistic panels. You don't find this lying around. Not in tanks. Not in fields." She leaned against the workbench, arms crossed, heart pounding behind her calm exterior. "How much is it worth?" Jace hesitated. "Depends on weight. That sheet alone could go for a few grand. If you've got more, I've got hundreds of pounds. Maybe tons." He stared at her. "I stripped most of the side armor. The hull's covered in it. Inside 2 braces, ribs, plating. It's not steel. It's all this." Jace let out a low whistle. "You realize what you're saying, right? That tank you bought, it's a prototype. Maybe even Black Project level. There's no reason this kind of metal should be used unless it was an experiment. Something off the books." Marley pulled the folded blueprints from her bag. "It was. Project Valkyrie." He took the sheets from her, his brow furrowing deeper with every glance. "Jesus. These markings. These are Lockridge codes." Lockridge? They were defense subcontractors, gone dark after the Cold War, supposedly absorbed into something bigger. Rumor is, they worked on stuff the Pentagon didn't want to admit existed. Marley exhaled. "You're telling me I bought a Cold War ghost?" "No," he said, slowly folding the blueprints again. "You bought a secret worth more than you can imagine. And people don't like when secrets get dug up." She nodded slowly, the weight of what she'd brought home settling in her chest. "Marley," Jace said, voice low now, serious. "If anyone else finds out what you have, they're not going to come offering cash. They'll come with questions and orders." She picked up the titanium sheet and slid it back into her duffel. "I'm not selling it," she said. He stared. "What are you going to do?" Marley's eyes lit with quiet fire. "I'm going to find out why someone buried it in the first place." Marley couldn't sleep that night. The blueprint sat unfolded on her kitchen table, surrounded by mugs of untouched coffee and scribbled notes she'd tried to make sense of. Diagrams layered with strange terminology. Honeycomb lattice dampeners, reactive composite shielding, and most chilling of all, non-attributable acquisition. She'd worked around the edges of military surplus before, flipped a few Humvees, even stripped out a downed chopper for salvage years back. But this was something else. She ran her fingers along the project name again. Valkyrie. It sounded like fiction, a name designed to impress Pentagon brass or movie audiences. But the documents were too technical, too meticulous to be fantasy, and stamped in the margins of every page. Lockridge Systems, confidential. That morning, she drove to the local university archives. She wasn't sure what she was even looking for. Maybe a hint? Maybe a whisper of the project in declassified reports? It took 2 hours of cross-referencing through old defense contractor directories before she found the name. Lockridge Systems. Founded 1957, dissolved in 1993, government contractor. specializing in advanced materials and vehicle testing. The records didn't say much, just that they had been a subcontractor under DARPA, and later folded into something called Aegis Engineering, a name that turned up exactly 0 public results. She tried public military archives next, digging through newspaper articles and congressional hearing transcripts. It was there, buried in a 1989 Senate budget report, a brief mention of Project Valkyrie. The line was vague, citing next-gen vehicle survivability research. No costs listed, no personnel, no photos. It had been erased, or close to it. Back at the shop, Marley walked slow laps around the tank, eyes tracing the edges of what she now knew was far more than just an old war machine. It had been a prototype, maybe the only one ever built, armored not just for combat, but to survive anything. She noticed things she hadn't before. The unusually thick joints around the turret ring, the reinforced crossbeams in the suspension, well, these weren't designed for simple durability. They were over-engineered, designed to disappear into the landscape if the program ever got scrubbed. She ran her hand along the plating again, remembering what Jace had said. People don't like when secrets get dug up. That evening, a truck rolled up her driveway. Marley heard the tires on gravel and stepped out onto the porch with a wrench still in her hand. 2 men got out, plain clothes, neat, unmarked black SUV. They didn't say who they were, but their posture screamed official. "You the owner of the tank?" one of them asked. "I am," Marley said carefully. "We'd like to talk. Off the record." "No such thing," she said flatly. They exchanged glances. The taller one opened his wallet. No badge, just a plain white card with a symbol embossed in silver. A triangle in a circle. Her blood went cold. The same mark from the junction box inside the tank. "You've got something that doesn't belong in civilian hands," the man said. Marley didn't flinch. "I've got a bill of sale. It's mine. Paperwork won't mean much if what's inside that tank gets out." She crossed her arms. "Then I guess I'd better find out what's still inside it." There was a beat of silence. The second man finally said, "We'll be in touch." They got back in the SUV and drove off, no lights, no plates. Marley stood in the dust long after they disappeared. Her jaw set. Her mind raced. And somewhere, deep in the belly of that forgotten machine, she knew something was still waiting to be found. 3 days later, the offer came. Not from the government, not from the guys in the SUV, but from someone else entirely. Marley was elbow deep in the tank's undercarriage when a black Escalade rolled into the yard. Sleek, polished, too clean for this part of town. The man who stepped out looked more hedge fund than military mid-42nds. Tailored charcoal blazer, aviator sunglasses, and shoes that had never seen gravel. He didn't introduce himself right away. Just surveyed the yard like he was appraising it. Or claiming it. "You Marley Reyes?" he asked. She didn't answer. Just wiped her hands on a rag and nodded cautiously. "I represent a firm that acquires rare industrial assets," he said smoothly, like he was ordering from a menu. "We heard you picked up something interesting from a lot outside Macon." Marley crossed her arms. "News travels fast." He smiled without warmth. "Let's just say we specialize in strategic retrieval." He reached into his blazer and handed her a folder. Inside was a letterhead with a corporate logo she didn't recognize, Vindex Holdings, and a formal purchase offer for the tank. All of it. Every bolt, every panel. $4 million. Cash. No questions. Marley blinked once. "You think that's enough? For something that was rotting in a field?" "Absolutely." She handed the folder back. "You think I don't know what it's made of?" "I think," he said slowly, "you don't understand what it's connected to." His voice lowered. "That tank wasn't supposed to be found. Project Valkyrie was terminated for a reason. The plating is just one part of it. There are things in that machine that never made it to testing. We're trying to prevent a bigger mess by throwing money at it," she said. He shrugged. "Money solves a lot of problems." Marley narrowed her eyes. "For who?" He leaned in, voice now quiet and deliberate. You think the titanium is the treasure. It's not. It's a signal. One that's going to bring more eyes to your door. You got lucky finding it, Marley. But luck runs out. She held her ground. You're not the first to come looking. You should listen to the next one. He slid a card across the table, matte black. No name, just a private number. You've got 72 hours, he said. After that, the offer's gone. And you won't like who comes after me. He turned and walked back to the Escalade without waiting for a response. The vehicle disappeared down the road, its tinted windows flashing once in the sun like the wink of a sniper scope. Marley stood alone in the barn, folder still in her hand. The number on the card burned into her palm. $4 million. Enough to rebuild her shop. Start over. Walk away from all of it. But then her eyes drifted to the exposed hull of the tank. To the strange, seamless metal. To the diagram still pinned to her wall. To the mystery waiting beneath her feet. This wasn't just about money. This was about the truth. And she wasn't ready to sell that yet. 2 days later, Marley was finishing a weld on the tank's rear bracket when she heard the crunch of tires again. This time, it wasn't subtle. 3 black SUVs rolled in like a convoy, flanked by a white panel truck with no plates, no company logos, no flashing lights, just cold, clinical presence. She killed the welder and pulled off her gloves. The first SUV door opened before she even stood up straight. A woman stepped out. Mid-50 seconds, silver-streaked hair pulled into a low knot, black windbreaker over a navy suit. Her eyes didn't wander. They locked directly on Marley, sharp and unblinking. "Marley Reyes?" she asked. Marley said nothing at first, just nodded slowly. "I'm with the Defense Asset Recovery Bureau. We're here to assess unauthorized possession of classified military property." There it was. No more veiled threats. No more corporate smiles. This was official. Real. "I bought it at public auction," Marley said flatly. "Bill of sales in my office." "We're aware," the woman said. "And that may be valid, for the exterior hull, not what's inside." The rear doors of the panel truck opened, revealing 5 more people, 2 in fatigues, the rest in dark polos, with shoulder harnesses and clipboards. They began unloading gear. Scanners, tripods, sealed crates with yellow markings. Marley's chest tightened. "You don't have a warrant," she said. "We don't need one," the woman replied. "This vehicle is designated as a Tier 4 defense artifact. Once identified, its custody reverts immediately to federal control." "I haven't seen any paperwork stating that," Marley said. "You will." Within the hour, 2 of the men walked toward the tank, equipment in hand. Marley stepped between them. "You're not touching it." There was a long pause. The wind rattled the tin roof of the barn. The woman's voice dropped. "Miss Reyes, I strongly advise you to cooperate. There are protocols in place for situations like this. If you comply, we can resolve this without escalation." "And if I don't?" Marley asked. "We escalate." Marley stared at her. Then, slowly, she stepped aside. Not because she wanted to, but because she wasn't going to win that fight. Not today. The team moved fast. 1 technician climbed inside the turret. Another scanned the interior walls with a handheld LiDAR unit. The woman took photos, murmuring into an earpiece as she paced. Marley watched all of it from a distance, jaw clenched, arms folded so tight her muscles ached. Then something happened. One of the techs let out a whistle from inside the tank. "Ma'am," he called. "You're going to want to see this." The woman walked over, climbed halfway into the hatch, and leaned in. A moment later, her face changed. She stepped back quickly, nodded once, then turned to her team. "Seal it," she ordered. Now, they moved fast, pulling a reinforced tarp over the tank, locking it down with straps and clamps. They marked the perimeter with warning cones. "What did you find?" Marley demanded. The woman ignored her, walked straight back to the SUV. Marley followed. "What's inside?" The woman paused at the door. Her tone was ice. "You don't want to know." The door slammed shut, Engines roared. The convoy peeled out, dust kicking up behind them. They left the tank still tarped, still hers, for now. But something had changed. She could feel it. The urgency, the way they moved, the way that woman's face went pale for just a second. Something inside that machine still mattered. And whatever it was, they hadn't found it yet. Marley didn't sleep that night. She sat in the barn with a flashlight in one hand and the classified blueprints in the other, the tank looming beneath its tarp like a dormant monster. The inspection team hadn't taken it not yet, but they'd marked it like a predator marks prey. And the way that woman reacted, it rattled her. Not because she seemed afraid, but because she didn't want Marley to know why. At 2 a.m., Marley pulled the tarp back. The tank felt different now, like it was watching her. She climbed into the turret, crawled through the hollow space where the crew cabin used to be. Her fingers traced seams and welds, looking for something, anything the inspection team hadn't touched. A latch, a groove, a panel missed. She found it beneath the gunner seat. At first, it looked like a structural brace. But when she pushed on it, it flexed slightly. Hollow. She took a pry bar and wedged it along the edge, carefully working the seam. It took 5 minutes of patience, muttering, and knuckle-bruising pressure before the plate popped loose with a dull hiss, releasing a gust of stale, dry air. Behind it was a sealed compartment, no bigger than a suitcase, tucked deep behind armor and bulkhead. Inside, a hard case container, military grade, its latches stiff from time. Marley hesitated, hands trembling now, and clicked it open. Inside, packed in foam, a small data drive, unmarked, a sheaf of microfilm, sealed in mylar, a faded photograph, and a notebook. She lifted the photo first. Black and white. 3 men standing beside the tank in its prime, sleek, clean, fresh from fabrication. One man circled in red ink, handwritten beneath it. D. Halcrow, Valkyrie Engineering Chief. The notebook was leather-bound, filled with diagrams, equations, and margins lined with desperate, slanted notes. Pressure fields unstable above 60 kilometers per hour. Containment breach probable. Testing postponed. Memo from Joint Ops. Project freeze imminent. They're pulling funding. Told me to walk away. I won't. If this works, it will change everything. Marley turned to the final page. A single phrase, underlined 3 times. This tank isn't armor. It's a proof of concept. Her breath hitched. She looked at the drive. It wasn't just engineering data. It might be everything: design, testing, maybe even audio logs. Evidence. The kind of thing people bury or kill for. She wrapped the drive in a rag and slid it into her jacket. Outside, an engine revved in the distance. Not a car. A drone. She could hear the distinct buzz, mechanical, light, circling. She killed the light, froze in place. The barn bathed in shadows. They were watching again. She sealed the compartment, replaced the brace, climbed out fast but careful. No headlights appeared on the road. No visitors pulled up the driveway. Just the slow, subtle reminder. She wasn't alone. But now, she had something they didn't. And she finally understood this wasn't about titanium. Not really. That was the bait. What she'd found wasn't just metal. It was a blueprint for power, and someone, somewhere, didn't want it to see daylight again. By morning, Marley had made her decision. She packed a duffel bag with the notebook, the drive, the microfilm, and the photo, wrapped them in shop rags, buried them in the toolbox she used, least the one with a broken drawer, hidden behind her oxyacetylene rig. She'd always believed in machines, in the truth that lived inside them. But this wasn't a rebuild. This was a reckoning. She didn't call the authorities. She didn't post online. Instead, she called Jace. When he arrived, she led him into the barn and showed him the hidden compartment, now resealed. Told him everything. The inspection team, the man from Vindex, the drive. She watched the blood drain from his face as she opened the notebook. Jesus, he whispered. This isn't armor tech. This is propulsion. Kinetic redirection. Inertial damping. Explain it to me like I'm not an engineer, Marley said. He flipped pages, pointing at the equations. If this worked, and that's a big if, this tank wouldn't just survive hits. It would absorb them. Redirect the energy. Turn kinetic force into stored power. That kind of system, you put that on aircraft? Satellites? Vehicles? You're talking next-gen warfare. Or clean power, Marley added softly. No combustion, no emissions, just stored energy. Jace looked at her. You realize what you have. She nodded. That's why I can't let them take it. They spent the day dismantling the rest of the hull, pulling plates, cataloging parts. Jace helped photograph every interior detail, frame by frame. Marley backed it all up on 3 separate encrypted drives. One she kept, one she gave to Jace, and one she mailed anonymously to a journalist she trusted. No names, no explanation, just the data. That evening, Marley stood in front of the tank, now stripped bare, its skeleton exposed to the fading light. What once looked like a rusted relic now resembled a monument not to war but to secrecy, to the kind of ambition that burned too hot to be buried quietly. She thought about what the woman from the inspection team had said. You don't want to know. But she did. She wanted to know because the truth mattered. Because someone, somewhere, had spent years, maybe decades, trying to build something the world wasn't ready for. And now, by luck, or fate, or pure stubborn grit, that legacy had landed in her hands. She didn't want the money. She didn't want the fame. She wanted the meaning. Later that week, the inspection team returned. They didn't ask questions this time. They handed her an envelope, an official seizure notice, and loaded the remaining shell of the tank onto a lowboy trailer. But they didn't find the drive, or the notebook, or the files. They didn't know that Marley had already passed the story on, that the machine might be gone, but the truth was out. Months passed. Her shop grew busier not from the exposure, but because people started to hear whispers that the girl with the strange tank had seen something, that maybe she'd stood at the edge of something huge and didn't flinch. And Marley? She didn't chase headlines. She kept building, restoring, teaching. She trained 2 new apprentices, took on projects no one else would touch. But every now and then, in the quiet hours after the tools were put away, she'd open the bottom drawer of her desk, pull out the photo of Halcro and the tank, stare at it, and whisper, "We didn't forget. The tank may have been made of titanium, but its core was something stronger. Conviction."